Welcome everyone. I'm delighted that so many of you have joined us today for the launch of our new strategy. Today, you'll hear from a number of my colleagues, including our great CEO, Nick O'Donoghue, about the development and thinking behind the strategy that the Foreign Secretary announced 3 weeks ago, and our ambitions for the next 5 years. You'll also have your chance to put your questions to Nick and our Head of Corporate Strategy, Matt Robinson, for the last part of the event. So please do submit your questions via the Q&A. Before I hand over to Nick, I would like to say a few words of introduction. The 5-year strategy, agreed with our shareholder, is a key part of our governance. It lays out our plans for the next 5 years and the commitments that we are accountable to deliver. Last week, we published the achievements made under the 2016 to 21 strategy on our website. When you look at the progress made and listen to the future plans from Nick, I hope you will agree that though of course we made some mistakes, we've done some great things in the last 10 years. But the future plans are even more important and exciting. CDC, or British International Investment, as I should say now, has been able to grow as an institution from a single office, single product organization, investing around $300 million a year in 2011, to the 11 office, multi-product organization that we are today, committing annually over $2.5 billion of long-term impact-driven capital. That we've been able to do this and yet have the appetite and flexibility to meet the shareholders' new ambitions, in my opinion, is down to 3 main things. Firstly, the support and challenge of the shareholder, FCDO themselves, and the support across HMG, and then of course, the UK taxpayer. Second, the entrepreneurialism of our partners on the ground in Africa and Asia, and our fellow development, finance and private sector investors. Thirdly, the quality and commitment of Nick, his management team, the staff at CDC in London and all our offices around the world, and my colleagues on the board and the investment committees at CDC, past and present. I thank all of you for your support. At our annual review in July, I announced that a search for my successor would start, so that we'd be ready for the implementation of the new strategy starting Jan 1. And I'm delighted to say that after a competitive public appointment process, the Foreign Secretary has appointed Diana Layfield. I've known Diana for several years and simply cannot think of anyone better to chair BII and to work with Nick to take us to the next level. She's been CEO of Standard Chartered Bank in Africa and has deep experience of technology from Google, credentials in strategy from McKinsey, and public company and healthcare experience as she sits on the board of AstraZeneca. Earlier in her career, Diana qualified with the RAF and then flew for the International Red Cross and United Nations in Africa. Diana will also be the first female chair in our 73-year history and takes female representation to 60% on our board. Diana and I have begun a smooth and orderly transition process, and I will step down at the February board meeting next year. I was appointed chair in 2013, and it's been really one of the privileges of my life to serve CDC, now BII, for all these years. I will be cheering on from the sidelines as I know Nick, Diana, and all the team will do their very best to create productive, sustainable, and inclusive investments to make the world a better place, and also to strive to make the UK taxpayer proud. Just as Lord Reith said 7 decades ago, doing good without losing money. British International Investment really is an amazing institution, pioneering and forward-looking. So thank you so much for coming today. Over to Nick.
Thank you, Graham, and good morning, and thank you all for joining us today. This is an important day for CDC, for BII. We only do this every 5 years, and that's launch a new strategy, and an enormous amount of work goes into it, and I think you hope you will get a sense of that today. So I did want to start by acknowledging all my colleagues and our partners at FCDO for everything that they've done to get us to this point. Let me begin with the most visible change for CDC, and this is our name. As many of you will know, and Graham referenced, we joined as Foreign Secretary last month at the London Stock Exchange as she announced our new name and our new chair. And you'll know, therefore, that from the 4th of April next year, we'll be known as British International Investment. And changing name and brand is a hugely significant move for any institution. And for us at CDC, it's going to be the first time in 73 years that we will have made such a change. I think we all believe, however, that BII is a strong, modern name which communicates, importantly, the increased breadth of what we do, but also clearly defines us as a British institution, funded by the British taxpayer, that's working to bring not just capital, but high standards and transparency to all our markets. Of course, our name may be the most visible, but it's not the most important part of our strategy. And at today's launch, we're sharing the details of that 2022-26 strategy. And as I said earlier, it's been part of an almost 2-year process with our board, with our executive committee, with our shareholder, and many other internal and external stakeholders. It reflects, I think, the lessons that we've learned in recent years and the recommendations of others, including ICAI, whose help and scrutiny have, I think, played a major part in helping us improve. And critically, we believe our new strategy builds on the development mandate that's really been at the heart of our work for nearly 75 years, and also on the successful track record of growth that we've shown over the last decade. And indeed, over the past 5 years, we've invested close to £7 billion. The vast majority of that has been self-funded through returns of capital. We've also mobilized a further £2.5 billion. In doing that, we've backed businesses that employ over 1 million people and paid in excess of £10 billion in taxes. And we're proud, as Graham said, to set out our achievements over the last 5 years in a report which we published a couple of weeks ago and which can be found on our website. But we also know that there's a lot more to do, and our strategy sets, I think, a new ambition for scale and innovation. We know countries can only develop if their economies grow, and the private sector has to be the driver of that economic growth. That's what provides jobs, it's what increases productivity, it's what raises living standards. But increased economic growth by itself is not enough. All economic activity has to be transformed to become more environmentally sustainable. Jobs have to be high quality jobs, and the benefits of growth need to be shared across all sections of society. So at the core of our new strategy, therefore, are 3 objectives: productivity, sustainability, and inclusion. And these are going to be the central planks driving how we use our capital over the next 5 years. These objectives are going to be underpinned by a new scoring system to help refine our choices, maximize our impact, alongside a new policy of responsible investing, which provides greater detail on the environmental, social, and business integrity requirements. And you're going to learn more about both of those later in our panel discussion. We also need to be clear what these objectives mean for what we'll invest in and where we'll invest. Firstly, they're going to mean that financing green infrastructure and the transition to a green economy is going to play a much larger role in our activities. And indeed, the new strategy positions us as the UK's principal provider of climate finance to developing economies. And it gives us the opportunity to play a key role in addressing the huge challenge that climate change presents, particularly in our geographies. Secondly, the strategy is also giving us a broader mandate to support and invest in digital infrastructure in the digital economy. It's going to give us more ability to support young entrepreneurs who are using technology to develop solutions that can transform so many lives. And thirdly, it puts inclusive finance at the heart of our mission. For example, we'll be including a new target of 25% of annual new commitments in gender finance. So what does it mean for where we invest? Our new strategy will retain our historic focus on Africa, where we've been a long-term patient investor throughout our history. But it will also significantly pivot us to Asia, and in particular Southeast Asia, to provide green finance. It's going to add the Caribbean, where climate change, and in particular adaptation and resilience, are critical issues. And we're also going to draw on our experience to tailor more precisely the way in which we invest in different countries. No 2 markets are the same, and we'll adapt our in-market presence and our offer in each geography, depending on the unique needs and opportunities of the country in question. As I said in my introduction, we're also proud to be such a central part of the UK government's international finance offer, because be in no doubt that being owned by the UK taxpayer is a critical advantage for CDC BII. And in particular, we benefit from HMG's networks and relationships in our geographies, and also from the UK's reputation for high environmental, social, and governance standards. And that's really helped us become a partner of choice across our geographies. And many of these partnerships have been and will be with UK companies leveraging UK technology and innovation. And of course, being British also helps us mobilize capital, and that has to be a huge focus and a huge opportunity, not only for BII, but the whole development finance community. It means we'll continue our work to cement the UK as a global development finance hub by mobilizing more capital alongside our own, taking advantage of our proximity to the City of London, the world's largest international financial centre. And indeed, this is already happening, and you're going to hear examples in today's session of the kind of partnerships that we've already been successful in building over the last few years. And that's everything from mobilizing private capital from a leading British developer of renewable energy projects into a renewable energy platform in India, to our agreement with one of Africa's leading entrepreneurs to invest to improve access to affordable and quality internet across Africa, and our partnership with one of the world's leading port operators to develop new ports infrastructure across Africa. So let me say finally, before turning it over to my colleagues, a lot has changed over the past 5 years, and the global COVID pandemic has reversed many of the development achievements of the past decade, and businesses and livelihoods all over the world have been threatened or destroyed. But providing capital to help countries and companies grow and improve lives is the function of development finance, and it's never been more critical than it is today. But it's also never been more important to do this in the right way and set an example that we can all be proud of. We know it's not just about the money, it's about the standards you set. It's about the environmental standards, the governance standards. It's about the way you interact with local communities. It's also about what your ultimate objectives are. And we're not just an investor, we're a development investor, an impact investor. And that's why we want to put inclusiveness and sustainability and productivity at the heart of all the decisions that we make. And we're not just any development investor, we're Britain's development investor. And that's something which presents us with huge advantages and gives us even greater opportunities. So now we're going to hear in more detail about our approach. And to do that, we're going to start with Srini and Tembite, who head our businesses in Asia and Africa, and who are going to be interviewed by Lindsay, our Director of Communications. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Nick. Hello, I'm Lindsay Taff, I'm Director of Communications. And for our first panel, it's great to start where we always start in our thinking, which is with the markets where we invest, how we respond to the needs and the opportunities in those markets as both investors and as partners to those countries. So I'm delighted to be joined by our Head of Africa, Tembite Ermias, and Srini Nagarajan, our Head of Asia. Tembite, Srini, welcome.
Thank you.
I'd like to start off by asking each of you, what lessons did you learn from the last strategy period, and how have those helped to inform our thinking about this strategy period?
So I think there were several lessons that we learned through the last strategy period, and I would say there are at least 3 of them that translate into our next strategy period. The first one is the need for bespoke solutions in our markets. And I think that means that both the approach to individual countries being different, and then also the capital needs and the capital tools that need to be applied being different. That's one. The other thing I think we learned was that partnerships are a way for us to actually catalyze change. In other words, it helps us extend our impact. It helps reduce risks. Those could be operational risks or financial risks. And it's a very powerful way for us to ensure that our footprint it continues to grow on the continent in Africa. And then the third thing I'd say is that local presence and the importance of that. Over the last 5 years, we've built up our teams, both in Africa and in Asia, significantly. And I think that has shown that for our investments themselves and their performance, as well as for our stakeholders, this is of value. Those are the 3 things I'd say are the things we learned over the last 5 years.
And could you expand a little on this differentiated approach in terms of how it might impact what we do in the next 5 years?
Sure. So, I mean, if I take Africa as an example, it's a collection of 54 different countries, each of them with different characteristics. We have a set of countries that are relatively advanced, the biggest one being South Africa in terms of the development of its capital markets. We have other countries which are large in population, have development needs as well, and have reasonably stable investment environments. And then we have countries which are on their way. They're relatively small, but they're growing, and they're interesting from an investment perspective and friendly to private investment. And then we have a core set of countries that we call fragile countries, which have very specific needs in terms of helping build up the ecosystem. So what we've done is in this next strategy period, we've identified those 4 different segments and called them mature countries, as in South Africa, powerhouse countries, as in Nigeria, for an example, and stable countries, a range of countries, including Cote d'Ivoire and others, and fragile countries, which includes 22 other countries in Africa. And I think that segmented approach allows us to deploy our capital and our tools differently in those countries to address the needs.
And Srini, how's it impacted in Asia in terms of the lessons and how you see those affecting how we'll operate over the next 5 years?
Asia is a bit of a mixed bag. We have mature markets like Tinbite said, and some of them have been fragile, like Myanmar, Afghanistan, and the external debt and FX crisis in Sri Lanka. If you look at the biggest learnings we have had, I think as a counter-cyclical investor, it's important to time the market when your capital is most additive. And that's probably one of our biggest learnings. In COVID-19, when there was a liquidity crunch, our capital was extremely additive. I think that's probably one of our biggest learnings. Digitization is irreversible from what it appears to me. It helps a lot in terms of reducing the cost of services and improving the realizations of producers. And that's been a biggest learning for us in terms of the way technology is impacting the lives of people. And the adaptation of people to technology has been extraordinary. Third one I would say is that the renewable market, the scale at which our markets have achieved with a very transparent auction mechanism has been outstanding, really. I mean, it's been amazing. The one thing I wanted to say is that definitely there is ability for CDC's capital to be much more catalytic in our market, and its ability to attract third-party capital, keeping City of London in mind as well, really. And can I say one thing that I want to say that in our markets, it's not just the smartest and the strongest people that will survive, but the most adaptable, like Darwin says, really. And a key element in this entire ingredient is about judgment, about who you back, and not just, it's about ability to build a relationship and not falling into the power of crowd and momentum, which makes CDC Capital more distinguished. That's what I would say is our biggest learning. In terms of our next strategy, I would say we are pushing the boundaries on development impact, keeping our very purpose in mind and our capital, so that our capital is most additive. Today, we live in a world where ESG is getting more or less commoditized. When we look back 20 years back, when we introduced the concept of ESG, that was pretty new to corporates. So the new strategy coming into force, the PSI framework, will ensure that our capital is used in the best possible way to meet these opportunities and challenges. And climate emergency is evident in our country, and we will put climate finance, technology investing, and inclusive finance at the heart of our mission, really. And final point is South Asia will also have to play an enhanced role on gender, given that we are starting from a relatively lower base.
That leads me quite nicely onto, Srini, the expansion, the geographic expansion that we'll be seeing into the Indo-Pacific, and the climate focus that might bring. Could you tell me a little bit more about that? Because of course you're taking on an expanded role to help us achieve that expansion.
The Indo-Pacific expansion is a more recent initiative into markets like Indonesia, Vietnam, and the Mekong countries, and eventually Philippines. Our plan is to have a hub office in Singapore with a coverage presence in three countries. The plan is to clearly focus on climate-related investments through equity, project finance, and definitely selectively back the fund managers in the region. Singapore as a hub will help us to build relationship with regional investors like Temasek and GIC and draw on the broader expertise in the region, really. We aim to commit around $300 to $500 million over the next strategy period of 22-26 for climate finance in the region. Most importantly, we will look to increasingly collaborate with the UK government and leverage their expertise in the region. And finally, I want to say I will continue to oversee South Asia as well and provide support to the teams.
If I can go back to something you mentioned earlier, you mentioned catalytic capital, and how that would be important within our markets. What does that mean to you?
Fundamentally, I think if you try and look at our markets, there is abundance of capital, and the opportunity and the constraint is actually the lack of bankable platforms to back, right? CDC has the capacity to be much more catalytic, and we have proved that in the case of IANA. Our ability to nurture a platform, build it from scratch, and ability to attract third-party capital, really. Our capital from that perspective can be much more catalytic in nature in our markets, ability to mobilize third-party capital, and allow these entities to create impact at scale. That's exactly what I mean by that.
And Tembete, over the last 10 years, Africa has been probably the primary focus for much of our capital. Is that going to change under this strategy?
Over the last 5-year strategy period, we have deployed about $5 billion in Africa. And over this coming 5-year strategy period, we expect to deploy around $7.5 billion. So that's nearly a 50% increase in the capital commitments that we'll make to the continent. So in short, certainly Africa becomes as important or more important than it's been in the past, certainly not a step backwards. I think also the thing to consider is that, as I mentioned earlier, from a local presence perspective, over the last 5 years, we've built up the number of staff that we have. Currently, we have about 25 people. Over the next 5 years, we expect that to grow to up to 80 people, 80 to 100 people, in fact, many of whom will be our investment teams. So we will not only grow the number of people on the ground and the number of countries where we have presence, but also the mix of our teams on the ground will include investment staff. So what that'll do is it'll allow us to evaluate opportunities more actively in the market, engage with stakeholders, on a continual basis, and participate in the opportunities that the markets provide us. The third point I'd make is that, as part of our strategy going forward, there are several areas where we will be spending more time than we've done in the past. For example, in venture capital, early stage investing. This is a key area for Africa, and it's a place where perhaps we haven't been able to do as much as we would have liked to do in the past, as it was not a focus. But as we go forward in this, and as we know in the African context, there is significant opportunity to leapfrog in businesses, and particularly to harness the power of ICT or technology to enable existing businesses and business models further. And that's another area where we will do more than we've done in the past going forward. So I think that CDC's focus continues to be on Africa. We simply will be growing the pie. We're not shrinking the part of the pie that Africa gets.
One of the things that I think both of you have mentioned is that a key aspect of how we work will be an increased focus on partnership. And obviously we have a new name, British International Investment. How do you see this sort of British partnership supporting what you do over the next 5 years? Tembete.
So, I think at the heart of it, how we think about partnership is about identifying businesses out there that are like-minded to us in terms of focus on development impact and commercial returns, of course, but primarily development impact as being the anchor of what we want to do in our geographies. So identifying, the businesses who have that like-minded objectives, both in the UK, but also in the market. We have examples of partnering with Vodafone currently, as well as with Liquid Telecoms, which both of them have a UK and then Pan-African respectively presence. But they are like-minded to us in that they are pursuing the same objective of development impact. So that's one element of it. The other element is us bringing our full capability into those partnerships. And by us, I mean the broader us. So it's UK government, including CDC's skills and capabilities and relationships and access, but also, again, the UK government's presence in different programs through the diplomatic presence as well, and bringing that to bear into the partnership. So that capability, broadly speaking. And then I think the third one is for us to work, CDC is a patient capital provider. We have very long timeframes. We're able to weather the storm, as it were. As it happens in our markets, but bringing that patience into the relationship and bringing the confidence that brings into the partnership is another thing that we do. And for us also continuing to grow our flexibility in terms of working with different kinds of partners and understanding how they work so that we meet them halfway as we do it. So I think that partnership is about how we extend our presence. It's also about, how we bring value. And it's about also how we put the best foot forward for the UK, the UK interest in the country.
And from you, Srini, you've already mentioned IANA, which is a great partnership that we've been working on with the UK government. How will this change things for Asia?
In terms of partnerships, just to add to what Tenbite said, I think we have to pick certain themes like the climate theme, where there is scope to work with the global biggies like BP, for example. Particularly, there are areas where we can align ourselves with our new PSI framework and the country priorities. And of course, opportunities to mobilize capital from the City of London in the whole process as well, really. Second important thing is to keep the wider, try and deepen our relationship with FCDO and keep the wider HMG network in mind. I mean, we are attempting in India a closer interaction with DIT and UKEF colleagues to see this, whether we can make this a one product suite and make sure that the level of awareness goes up in this. The third point is, I think as CDC, we need fewer, deeper relationships in our markets, where our ability to penetrate more and do with more these partners is something in Asia we can attempt to do. For example, right from the sovereign wealth funds till the development financial institutions, till the large corporates in this country, everybody is really focused on climate as an important theme. And given the fact that our climate focus cuts across sectors, not just across the developing the overall the utility scale and the open access, our ability to partner with these major biggies in these markets across sectors is something we should be able to work with. And I'm very excited about building these partnerships. And as we speak every day, there are a lot of partners very willing and very keen to work with CDC. They believe we have expertise in the overall climate theme.
So what opportunities are you excited about, given where we are today in our markets? Tenbite.
Well, there are many opportunities in our markets, actually, Lindsay, and the challenge is actually filtering through them and then bringing them to investment. So when I look at let me pick a few countries in Africa. If I look at Nigeria, there are plenty of agro-processing opportunities. There are the financial institutions are very keen to support SMEs, small and medium enterprises. There are opportunities to work with them on that. And there's manufacturing opportunities in Nigeria as well. When I look at Kenya, there are plenty of service companies that are based in Kenya that want to expand into the region. And they look for capital to do so. And the kind of capital that DFIs provide is very convenient for them as they cross borders. Kenya, as you might expect, also there are plenty of companies trying to basically use technology to enable core businesses or core activities in the market, whether it's insurance companies or agriculture companies or fintech companies as they were. There are plenty of opportunities there. Egypt as a third country, if I pick that up, there are opportunities in water and water and sanitation and hygiene, trade logistics. Many of Egypt's also manufacturers that are looking to grow and to drive their exports are looking for capital as well. So we see opportunity there. Egypt has a hotbed of technology-enabled social businesses. And I think that's another area where I think the venture capital focus that we have in the next strategy period will also give us opportunities. So really, there are many opportunities. The question is, as I said, to identify them, then to screen them and bring them to investment readiness and to deploy the capital. But I'm quite excited because I think that is, the next chapter for the continent. Many of these represent the next stage of development within their individual economies.
And coming to you, Srini, you mentioned our PSI framework, our productive, sustainable, inclusive framework. And we've talked a little about sustainability in the markets where you are. What about the productivity and inclusive opportunities that you see?
See, I think there are three main aspects to this. One is, as far as climate is concerned, we spoke about sustainability and the large-scale opportunities for us to deploy significant amounts of capital in India and the rest of South Asia, because it's an emergency, really. In terms of certain sectors, for example, food and agriculture, it hasn't attracted much of private investments at all. And our capital can be extremely additive. So we definitely have to invest more, and using tech framework, I mean, because agri-tech is a very, very growing area. And it's able to cut across the value chain substantially and reduce the cost of services. So our ability to invest more and more in the food and agriculture, and that's where we are really increasing the realizations in the hands of producers, is something which we should invest more and more time and efforts on this to build transactions there, really. At scale. The third important point I would say is that there is a lot of opportunity for South-South cooperation, particularly on technology, given the fact that India is really at the epitome of technology and the tech deals. Our ability to transform some of these transactions and the way the markets are changing in India to our rest of the markets in South Asia and Africa is something we should try and do much more actively. But I'm aiming to do this much more actively with colleagues within the region and in Africa as well, and in London. The final point I just want to make here is that on inclusivity, given the fact that we have a specific definition, I mean, our ability to try and do directed lending to financial institutions for specific purposes is very high. And I think financial institutions, both on the electric vehicle front and also on the gender front, are willing to take on such challenges today. And that's the only way we will be in a position to. The inequality in the society has gone up post-COVID, which is evident. And I think this directed lending, particularly, that's a very important component of inclusivity to make sure that the marginalized sections of society are addressed very effectively. And that's what CDC Capital is most effective.
Great, thank you. Srini Tembise, thank you for joining us this morning. And next, we're having a short film led by our Chief Impact Officer, Liz Lloyd, looking at that framework that Srini mentioned, productive, sustainable, inclusive, and which are our 3 objectives for the next strategy period.
Our strategy sets out how we intend to invest to meet critical needs in support of the UN Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement. And there are a number of opportunities and challenges that we are looking to address. For example, we know that there is an opportunity to invest to improve productivity by backing entrepreneurs to unleash growth and create decent jobs. The countries where we invest also include some of the world's most favourable conditions for renewable energy. And we will invest to reach marginalised groups, such as women who have significant untapped potential. To meet these opportunities and challenges, we have 3 strategic development objectives. We will make investments that are productive, sustainable, and inclusive.
Fundamentally, digital communications levels the geographic playing field. I mean, for example, we recently connected some of the largest cities in the DRC for the first time that had terrestrial connectivity, several million people, which previously were less connected than a small village in Europe would have been.
We are a wind project, 50 megawatt wind project located in Kharo, which is about an hour and a half to 2 hours outside of Karachi. The important thing is for us to identify that we are here the long term in the Indus Delta. And whilst we are generating electricity and creating value for shareholders, we should always keep in context that the shareholders are also part of the stakeholder group, which has an obligation in aggregate to the local community and to the environment we've chosen to work in for the long term.
When the internet happened, the mobile revolution happened, all of them changed the kinds of skills we should have, but they created a large number of jobs. Similarly, AI is starting to create a lot of jobs, but the skills are different. But it's giving some great opportunities, particularly for women to be in a high technology workforce and a global workforce, and young people from low-income backgrounds.
Welcome back. And just before we start the next session, a reminder to keep sending your questions in. We have over 700 of you online today, so we'll try to get through as many of them as we can. But now it's time to go a little deeper into those strategic impact objectives. I'm joined by Matt Robinson, who's our head of corporate strategy, who's been spearheading the project over the last 18 months to 2 years, and 3 colleagues from across the business who can give their perspective on how the impact objectives will play out in their areas. So I have Abhinav Sinya, who's our head of technology and telecoms, Yasmin Lamy, who's our deputy CIO and head of capital allocation and capital strategy, and Holger Rothenbusch, who leads our infrastructure and climate group. Welcome, everyone. So if I can start with you, Matt, just want to start off with the thinking behind the overall strategy. How did the lessons and the experiences of the last 5 years get us to this point?
Thanks, Lindsay. Hi, everyone. We're really lucky to get a lot of input and scrutiny from people right across our markets, our investees, of course, governments in Africa and Asia, and other stakeholders, civil society organizations, scrutiny bodies, UK parliamentarians, and of course our shareholder. And we talk to them all very regularly. But distilling really, I think, the things they wanted us and that we felt ourselves we should take from the last 5 years into the next 5 years, there were really 3 things that came out of it. First, make sure that we set some very clear goals for ourselves and make sure that those goals are really relevant to countries that want to get ahead in the future modern global economy. Now, we think those 3 goals, which we're talking about today, productive, sustainable, and inclusive, do that and are clear, and most importantly, are relevant to the future of the places where we invest. The second sort of lesson was, we should be very clear ourselves about how we're going to achieve those. We're always asking our investees, what's your route to market? And the question really is back to ourselves, what's ours? And there are a few elements to that. First of all, we are now a sector organized company. That's because our investees really are, by and large, infrastructure businesses, manufacturing businesses, companies that grow, distribute, process, export food and agricultural produce. Value chains work in sectors, opportunities and barriers often sector-based. And that's now how we think too, so that we can help our investees unlock those opportunities, and we can harness our own expertise in that way. So that's part of our own route to market. Second, another part is sort of how we think about different countries. Timbiti and Srini have talked about this, but we can now invest in over 70 countries. They're hugely different from one another. What will work in a large place where we can have investment professionals on the ground to find and manage investments ourselves is one thing. It's not necessarily the best way for us to channel capital to a very small or fragile country, which we really want to do, but where we have to work with very specialist partners and intermediaries to do that. And another final very important part of our approach is to sort of retain our risk appetite. We're very unusual in the development finance world to have a significant risk appetite. It allows us to be very equity focused, and that's something we're going to pursue. So routes to our own market, very important. Final thing is, what's our measures of success? We might talk about this later. We'll have a very clear impact goal for our company that's denoted by a new impact score. And of course, we will financially try to remain sustainable on a multi-year basis. So clarity of goal, clarity of how we'll get there, and clarity about how we'll measure success.
And how will we integrate those three impact objectives into the investment process? How will they inform that?
I think there's a couple of ways that'll happen. First of all, at the transaction level, all our investment teams know that from the 1st of January 2022, one of the first questions they're going to get asked at investment committee is, how does this investment contribute to one of our strategic objectives, or several, actually? You can imagine some investments, a renewable mini grid in a disadvantaged area will hit all of our goals, actually. So that's forefront of their mind, and they are already building a pipeline of investments that will do that. Stepping back a bit, I think some of our teams are already beginning to sort of innovate and sort of change their own resources and build their own muscles in different ways that will, in the long run, also help us meet our goals. So if I take our financial services group as an example, they've spent a lot of time recently building their capability to direct lending. So when we provide capital through the financial services sector for on lending, we will in future do that in ways which is directed, for example, to women-led businesses to help our inclusion goal, or to businesses making green or climate-friendly investments to help our sustainability goal. That's not something we did in the past, but that is something that our thinking about these three goals is already precipitating in our teams.
And you mentioned the impact score. Is when our investment teams are going to an investment committee, how will the impact score steer what they do, and how does that work?
Yeah, so we really wanted a golden thread to run from our three strategic goals right through our strategy and organization. And one of the ways for the next 5 years, one of the ways we're going to do that is through our new impact score. Because our goals are very specific, so for example, our inclusive goal, an investment's going to be more inclusive and be assessed as more inclusive if it does some or all of the following things: target women-led businesses or businesses with female employees or consumers, or investments in fragile states, or investments that target people living on very low incomes. And you can build a score around that, and we can do similar things for the sustainable and the productive goals. And each investment will get an overall impact score capped at 10. And at a firm level, we will track what we are achieving across our portfolio. We very much hope and we'll be accountable for that. And we will hope to optimize that score, actually, subject to remaining a sustainable financial institution. So there is that thread from our goals right through the way we assess every investment to the way that we'll be held accountable.
Great, thank you. If I can move to you, Abhinav. Productivity is something that we've been talking about quite a bit, and particularly around the real focus that we're going to have on digital transformation. And that's an area you've been spearheading for us for the last few years. Could you tell us a little bit more about how the strategy is going to influence our plans?
Well, thanks, Lindsay. Look, I think, and hi everyone. Productivity has, in the classical economic sense, you always think of it as either providing better physical, goods, so mechanization or better infrastructure, or you improve the skills of the workforce, or you use technology. So it's always been part of our thinking. But I think what we found with technology and digital transformation is that there are 3 or 4 really incredible attributes to it, which talk towards productivity improvement. So first, it's very cost efficient. So instead of just replicating infrastructure again and again, you can do it in a much more cost efficient way when you deliver those outcomes using technology. It's also very replicable and very scalable. So what we found is what works in, let's say, Egypt works then in Nigeria, works in Pakistan or India, and these are productivity enhancers in a non-linear manner. So that's something which also talks to cost efficiency in a way. And look, what we see with digital transformation is that in a way it kickstarts the whole entrepreneurial flywheel in many of our markets. So you find entrepreneurs setting up businesses, they create jobs, they lead to better adoption of the same sorts of technologies. So it's a positive spiral which then enhances productivity. Look, we will be very focused on using digital transformation, using technologies to drive productive growth in our next strategy period.
And I'm right in understanding that you're looking at this across lots of different levels, so from digital infrastructure right the way through to how individual companies will use digital to transform the way they operate.
No, that's right, Lindsay. So we think of it as a digital stack. And so at the base of the stack, think of it as digital infrastructure companies. So companies which provide connectivity, whether it's in terms of fiber or mobile networks or towers and so on. And we have quite a bit of experience doing this, whether backing Liquid, which has set up now networks from Cape to Cairo and is setting up networks through DRC to connect the Atlantic to the Indian Ocean. We have similar companies in Nepal, for instance, called WorldLink. So we think of that as the base of what we do. The next part of the stack is digitally enabled companies. So these are the companies which will use these sorts of infrastructure to then provide services, right? Or connect different markets to suppliers of goods or services, or connect pools of talent to these markets. So as an example, we backed a company in India called LoadShare, which gets small fleet owners to service the likes of Unilever in very upcountry northeastern part of India, for instance, right? And so you provide jobs for drivers, you take away the friction in the system, and these are the sort of businesses we see developing quite a bit. We see a lot of it in Nigeria. We see some of it developing in Egypt as well. And then finally, at the top of the stack, we think of disruptive businesses. So for instance, we backed a company which uses artificial intelligence to predict or diagnose for breast cancer. And we will continue backing all these 3 sorts of companies, so across the stack. And we're very fortunate in that we have a flexible pool of capital. So we can back companies which are doing well with our more standard equity offer. We can also back very nascent companies with high risk capital that we have in the form of kinetic or catalyst capital, where we take more of a risk.
Oh, that brings me neatly onto Yasmin, who has been leading our catalyst strategies over the last few years and keeping on that theme of innovation. How will what we've learned over the last 5 years inform what we're doing over the next?
Thank you so much, Lindsay. Yes, building off what Abhinav has said, I think that the reflection of the last 5 years of our catalyst strategies and the portfolio that we've built, which is today across all the products that we have, across all the regions where we invest, and across all the sectors that are priorities for us. One of the things that we kind of came into 2021 reflecting on was that there were opportunities that ranged through a spectrum from really pioneering impact pathways on the really innovative end of the spectrum, which many of which are in Abhinav's portfolio, supporting really cutting edge technology companies, to places where the need was very high and the risk was heightened because of a COVID context, where we really started to introduce blended finance as a more kind of intentional mechanism for us to help in places where the market needed some flexible risk capital, to places where actually the risk profile of the asset base wasn't that high, but we could really step into the activity of mobilizing private capital. So we had been investing in a sector or a space where we felt we understood the risk profile, we felt it was a compelling opportunity, and this could be, for example, in the kind of more mainstream renewable energy sector. But the climate crisis really accelerated the need to really pull much more capital into that space than was naturally flowing. And so could we use catalytic capital across that spectrum of things is really how we came into thinking about what we would want in our toolkit for the next 5 years. And so I think we've had growth capital, we've had catalyst capital, we've had a technical assistance facility called CDC Plus in our toolkit over the last strategy period. And we're now looking to expand that toolkit into the new strategy period to really address some of these opportunities that we've uncovered.
And inclusion's often been a real theme of what we talk about when we talk about catalysts. It's about how we can be more inclusive in how we get our capital out there, but also in terms of looking at more inclusive services and directing our money out. How is that working on the diversity front? How are you seeing that working on things like gender finance for the next 5 years?
Yeah, I mean, I might actually start by saying, I think for us, inclusion is really a broader thing than just diversity and inclusion. It is really about access to affordable and high quality products and services as well. So whether it's about gender or racial equity or being in a rural area where access is low to a critical product like energy, when we talk about inclusion, I think we span all of those kind of considerations. And so if we think about the specific sector of energy, in Africa, so you have 600 million people lacking access to energy, to electricity. And so one of the things that I think we've really felt proud of is the portfolio of investments that support access to off-grid energy, which happens to be a catalyst portfolio. And through that portfolio, we've backed companies that offer solar home systems to small households through companies like Greenlight Planet, which is now reaching over 11 million people with clean energy products in Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, and Nigeria. 80% of those households are rural. So that is a really exciting inclusion story. And we want to make sure that stays in the picture and is captured when we talk about inclusion. So having said that, I think we also, of course, look at diversity and inclusion from a gender lens and from a racial lens too. We have been looking at the portfolio where we can apply our 2X criteria, which is how we kind of classify our gender lens investing. We have set an ambition that 25% of all of our new commitments should reach that threshold in the new strategy period, and also made a commitment to supporting more Black-led businesses in the years ahead too.
Great, thank you. And I think this point about inclusion and energy access in particular is one that we're going to keep returning to. I can see questions are coming in from the audience on that. Holger, given that we have in the past been more focused on poverty reduction and inclusion in that sense, why is action on climate change so core now to CDC's mission?
Thanks, Lindsay, and good morning, everybody. Well, I think it's obvious that very sadly, many of the countries that CDC is invested in, certainly in Africa, are at the very much the receiving end of the negative fallout of climate change. So they are contributing very little to the problem as such, but they're very much exposed to negative events like droughts and floods and storms and such things, which makes it very difficult for these countries to continue on their path of economic development. Hence, one of the very strong focuses that we have as part of our climate strategy is, as was mentioned earlier, on adaptation and resilience. So to support our partner countries in their way to be more responsive to the fallout of the negative impact of climate change. And that very much sort of entails us supporting what I would refer to a vertical transition model, where the economies need to transition from a carbon-based economy towards an environmentally and climate-friendly model. And we are then avoiding, supporting technologies that would create a lock-in situation for these countries, whilst we are supporting, for example, renewable energy, which will help these countries to continue to grow on a sustainable pathway. But we are also looking at ensuring that negative fallout of climate change in specific communities which are very much affected by the action that is taken in order to protect the climate, like for example in South Africa or in India, where coal-based power is a very significant component of the local energy mix, and coal mines and related communities are quite significant. So taking the learnings from what we had coming out of Europe, we need to make sure, and we are actually working in both these countries in providing support on TA and some fact finding into designing business models that ultimately will allow those communities to be benefiting from upskilling and from alternative employment opportunities, to not being left behind in the wake of this transition that all these economies need to be going through, rather than that they will be benefiting equally from the economic opportunities that will be created. And there's a very strong sort of overlap then between our climate focus as well as the inclusion thesis that we just talked about earlier.
And in terms of the next strategy, what would be different from what we've been doing over the last 5 years? So obviously, since Paris was agreed, we've already been stepping up our work in renewables.
Yes, no, that's right. So I think over the last few years, we've already very significantly increased our investments, what we would define as climate finance. And so by the end of this year, we will have achieved some $1.2 billion of investments of that. And actually during this year, we will have committed almost half of that over the last 5 years. So we are definitely ramping up our investment activity in this space very significantly. But looking forward to the next 5 years, I think it is fair to say that climate considerations really run across everything that we are doing. Certainly on the infrastructure side, where we'd refer to green infrastructure with our focus, say on the power side, which is a sector that is very important to us, where we are focused on renewable energy, both at utility scale, for example, through our subsidiary Globalec, which has just sort of won very significant tenders in South Africa to support the energy transition there, as well as on the off-grid energy side. And Yasmin was referring to a company like Greenlight Planet, which is an off-grid solar home company, which is providing sort of renewable energy solutions for households and for small businesses. But we also, across other sectors, not only in infrastructure, are very much sort of embracing the climate theme, like in forestry, which as of today still is the only viable carbon sequestration opportunity that we have, as well as focused on circular economy and e-mobility. Matt had alluded to the directed lending product that the Financial Services Group has been developing, where we have closed the first green lending facility, and we're going to be building on that. But beyond the sector focus, we are really sort of overall going to increase our capital deployment along climate lines very significantly. So we have a 30% commitment target over the next 5 years, where we want to provide climate finance as defined by the MDBs. And this will lead to commitment of about £3 billion over the next 5 years, which is well above what we have done the last 5 years. I mean, it's close to 3 times actually that much. And we have also changed our investment selection and analysis process. So we have implemented a very rigorous fossil fuel policy of the UK government. And we are assessing every project and investment that we do in infrastructure and in all the other sectors that CDC is investing in with regards to climate risks, but also then opportunities for mitigating climate risks. And earlier in the film, you will have seen Zephyr, a wind power project in Pakistan that we are supporting. And the film actually showed a mangrove rehabilitation project that we are supporting, which is, well, certainly very positive for the local ecosystem, but it is also a flood protection for the project. So this is one of the examples that we are sort of looking at in terms of assessing climate-related risk and then taking appropriate action. And so I think it's important to just to highlight that everything that CDC is doing will be aligned with the Paris Agreement across the board. And just 2 final points that I would want to highlight. On the portfolio construction level, we are looking at our carbon footprint holistically. So, what are the emissions that our portfolio companies are producing today? And we have articulated a pathway that will be leading us to net zero by 2050. And the final point, and that's sort of referring back to what Trini mentioned earlier, we are expanding our geography to be moving in particular into the Indo-Pacific,
but also into the Caribbean, very much with a climate view, where we are supporting sort of climate mitigation by investing in renewable energy, but also in particular in the Caribbean, for example, in adaptation resilience. So I think bottom line, the next 5-year strategy is very much educated by our climate aspirations. Yeah, I think to me, it's a green plan, which is great.
Thank you. I'm going to come to each of you for the final section of this to just ask you what do you think that success would look like in 2026 for British international investment? And you could answer that by perhaps focusing on a particular opportunity that you'd like to see realised, or a particular area that you think would really typify that success. And if I can come to you, Matt, first as the champion of the strategy.
Thanks, Lindsay. I think success by 2026, or frankly earlier, would be if we are recognised as the leading impact investor focused on Africa, Asia and beyond for climate investments, inclusive investments and things that make a difference at the level of a whole economy. And that people seek to partner us for that reason and come to us because we're recognised as such. So I think that's, for me, what success would look like.
Abhinav, can I come to you?
Yeah, I was being greedy, Lindsay. I have so many things to think about. But hey, look, for me, the topmost thing to focus on to show success is if we can build a vibrant, or support the building of a very vibrant venture ecosystem across Africa, such that people think of it in the same breath as often now they think of, say, Bangalore. And that would be very successful. I think we have the capital and the risk appetite and the skill sets for it. So I mean, that's really the goal that I'm setting for ourselves.
And are there particular economies in Africa that you think are particularly ripe for venture investment?
So, right now, I mean, Lagos is really, really interesting. Cairo is very, very strong. So is Nairobi. We're keeping an eye out for Kigali, and I would say parts of Morocco are looking very interesting. And look, the beauty of the system is you never know where the next one comes. These are very replicable. But I mean, those would be the top picks at this point. Yeah.
Thank you. Yasmin, if I can come to you.
Yeah, I mean, I echo very much what Matt and Abhinav have both said. And to add, I would say I would feel like we'd achieve success if our partners in the market, our clients, felt we were bringing solutions to the needs and the opportunities that they saw in front of them. I think there is a lot of opportunity, and really it is about offering that spectrum of capital to put the right kind of investment to work against the opportunities. And I would say, one aspect of achieving that will be partnership with other investors where we can match and complement the risk appetite, the impact objectives, and the return needs that each institution is bringing to bear to this very, very compelling landscape of investment opportunity.
Thank you. And you talked a little bit about earlier about some of those new innovations that you're looking to bring in over the next 5 years. Can you expand a little bit on that, particularly because I know you've set a target now for how to grow the Catalyst portfolio, for example.
Right. Yes, of course. I should have mentioned that. So we would like to, we are hoping to arrive at about $1 billion of commitments for Catalyst by the end of this year or within a few months. And that is a very significant milestone for us. To be catalytic with that degree of scale is a very exciting place to arrive after many years of working on growing that portfolio. And we want to keep going. So we have set an aspiration to triple the size of this portfolio over the next 5 years as well. And in addition, we would like to complement Catalyst with a couple of other things. We're looking at something called Kinetic, which is about being even more catalytic, even earlier stage, really innovative to seed nascent markets and partner with Catalyst in the places where we have really got that early stage risk. And also Quantum, which is a facility we'd like to develop in the next 5 years to bring mobilization capital into the markets where we can really attract private capital. And I'd also just like to recognize, we just announced at COP recently a couple of really exciting partnerships to bring some of that capital to bear alongside of our money. One of those is the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet, which is really looking to partner with foundations and development finance institutions and institutional capital to help solve the energy crisis. And the other is the Climate Innovation Facility with our key partner, the FCDO, looking to put £200 million to work for the really innovative end, probably alongside adaptation and resilience initiatives in the next 5 years.
Thank you. And do you see the City of London is a vital part of your plans going forward with these sort of new products?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that there is so much need for funding to really achieve the Sustainable Development Goals in what is increasingly a compressing time frame. We will only achieve them if we can mobilize more funding. And so a partnership with the City of London and global institutional investors has to be a part of the story.
And Holger, what are your aspirations for the next 5 years?
Yeah, well, I think to pick up on some of the themes that my colleagues mentioned earlier, and obviously I agree with all of them. I certainly think it would be fantastic if CDC was to make a very significant contribution to improve the access to energy for the very significant amount of people, mainly living in Africa as of today, that are still without power, 600 million people. And there are some very exciting opportunities coming out of technology. So we talked about digital, we talked about sort of new climate tech. Yasmin mentioned that we have entered into strategic alliances, like with the Global Energy Alliance, for example, and are working with our shareholders. So I feel that we are in a much better place and a strong place to have a number of tools that we can bring to bear to really make an impact along those lines. And so in 5 years' time, if we really had come up with a number of really interesting investment structures that are replicable and make a significant dent into that challenge, I think that would be fantastic. And I think the other element that I would want to highlight is, I mean, overall, sort of from a broader climate challenge perspective, let's say, I mean, around COP, there was the discussion around how much capital the richer countries would be providing or would be investing into the poorer countries. And it was about 100 billion, and they're not being achieved just yet, in a few years only. And I think whilst this is a very significant amount of money, this is nowhere near anywhere the amount of capital that is ultimately required for investments in those countries over the next decades to make those countries fit and to support them on their transition path. Hence, the theme that Yasmin just mentioned, mobilizing capital to connect the private capital, the very significant pools of capital, including then through the London Stock Exchange and the Capital Centre in the UK into those markets. That would be, I think, the other facet that I really would like to be looking back on and say, look, we've really made a contribution to connect those capital flows into those countries by having made projects bankable and having brought sort of new investment opportunities into those countries and capital that ultimately will help to overcome those challenges.
Thank you. And Holger, is it? I understand it's not just about getting the capital in, it's about getting it directed at the right parts of the chain. I know we've been doing work with GridWorks, for example, looking at transmission and distribution. Are you thinking about it in quite a broad way when you're thinking about getting that capital in and making projects more bankable?
Yeah, well, I think that there are different sort of ends of the spectrum. I mean, there is certainly the spectrum where GridWorks is operating, which is, well, I think at one end of the spectrum, which is very high risk, very difficult. I mean, that is where we are working, for example, with partners like the Global Energy Alliance, which is supported by Bezos, IKEA, and Rockefeller, in order to create pilots of a project in, for example, the northern DRC, which is mini grids that run on renewable energy that are then supposed to be replicable, so that we can actually do these things at a greater scale in countries like the DRC and Nigeria, which actually account for a very significant proportion of people without access to power. But that will be more at the sort of impact investor, high risk, innovative end, certainly for the next few years to come. The other end of the spectrum really is where the international commercial capital is sat, which isn't going to go to northern DRC anytime soon, but they are interested in, and they are sort of have risk appetite for investments in green energy, like renewable energy, like utility scale, for example, in South Africa or in India or in some other countries in Africa, where at the moment investment opportunities are very constrained for that type of capital. And so we are looking into ways as to how we can play a role in that. And the FCDO, our shareholder, has sponsored, I think, a very interesting program that was called Mobilist, which was identifying structures that would ultimately sort of actually enable that investment flow to happen. So I think quite a few interesting ideas across the value chain, and we're going to be operating across all of those.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And thank you to all of our panelists today for joining us. We're now almost ready to go on to the Q&A for the rest of the audience Q&A for the rest of the session. But before I do, we're going to take a short comfort break, and we'll be back just in a minute. Thank you very much. Welcome back, and I'm pleased to be joined now by Nick O'Donoghue, our Chief Executive, and Matt Robinson, our Head of Corporate Strategy, who are now going to answer the questions that you've been putting to us. I'm going to start off with, we're going to try and group them if we can, because we've had quite a number coming through. Where you've identified yourselves, I will say who has asked the question. I think the first group of questions are around risk appetite and questions around, are we now going to be more focused on middle-income countries than ever before? Nick, thank you.
CDC's always had a reputation, and deserved reputation, for being an organization, development finance organization, that takes lots of risk. And that isn't going to change. And we're going to continue to take risks through where we invest in the capital structure. So far away, the largest part of our investments are equity investments. But we're also going to continue to take risks through investing in fragile states. I think Tenbite, in his comments, made the point that our total investment in Africa, which is where most of the most fragile states are concentrated, will increase substantially. I think from $5 billion to $7 billion over this strategy period. So there's an even greater amount of funding available for those markets. And I don't think we should confuse the tilt towards a much stronger climate agenda with a tilt away from the key mission of CDC, which has always been and will continue to be development impact, poverty alleviation in the hardest countries in the world.
I think some of the questions are focusing on the fact that we've been talking a lot about big infrastructure. In fact, Matt, you said that at the end of the last session, that one of your key goals would be for us making a whole economy change. And I suppose there's this idea of, are we going for big infrastructure projects over smaller things in future?
I think we'll want to go for a mix. I mean, we are very lucky that we have the ability to make very big investments ourselves, which is because we're well financed and because of our risk appetite. And we've shown that even in the last few months with our sort of totemic partnership with DP World on ports infrastructure across Africa. But we will continue to back smaller investments and including things like our venture capital strategies, and by working through with intermediaries, banks and other investors who can sort of break up our investments into chunks that are relevant for the typical medium-sized businesses in our market. So I think we want to do both, but we're very lucky that we can do the big ones too.
I think that's right, and I think when you look at our recent history, you see everything from a $300 million plus investment to help support critical the growth for ports infrastructure in Africa. If you look at the other end of the scale, our trade finance investments go as low as $6. So that is obviously at the very extreme end. But as Matt said, within the venture capital community, you're talking inevitably about much smaller amounts of money. So I think it is a balance, and I think it's really important that development finance institutions go across the whole spectrum from big to small.
In fact, another question that we've been asked is that what is the strategy regarding venture capital? Will we be doing direct equity, or will it be through intermediated?
So the venture capital strategy starts with investing in venture capital funds. And what we're seeing in all across our geographies, particularly, of course, in India, but not just in India, but in countries like Pakistan and Kenya, in Nigeria and South Africa, what you're seeing is a huge growth in venture capital. You're seeing the emergence of a whole new generation of venture capital fund managers. So I think you have to start there. They're the people that tend to invest the seed capital and the very early stage capital. We can't do that ourselves in individual transactions. So working through them. The second element of the venture capital strategy is to co-invest with those managers. So once the companies that they back, the early stage companies that they back, as they start to develop, they often outgrow the early venture capital money. So it needs more institutional, somewhat larger, often amounts of anywhere between sort of $3 and $5 million to take the company to the next level. So that will be a core part of our, has been for the last year, through our what we call our venture capital scale-up strategy. That will become a bigger part going forward. And then, yes, we will make direct investments in companies that we really think obviously have the potential to be successful, but also very, very clearly meet our inclusive, sustainable, productive development criteria.
Actually, one of the questions that's come through is whether we can clarify, does each investment have to tick just one of productive, sustainable, or inclusive, or can they have all three or two?
They'll do, we will prefer to find investments that will do absolutely everything. Now, we have to recognize that's not always going to be the case. And this is a tool. It's not, we're going to try to create a balanced portfolio across all of our investments, some of which will be very focused on sustainability and climate change, but others will be focused on unlocking, big infrastructure needs, and modern economies need both. So we can't create sort of every box needs to be ticked approach. That's not what this is about. But equally, we will value where we can find investments that do several things at once.
Thank you. I have a question here on fragile and low-income countries from Prosper Rucchetti, who's asked what the investment strategy or the plan is to investing in fragile and.
Should I start? Yeah, we're very lucky that around a third of our portfolio by value today is in fragile markets. That is a significant amount, and we really hope to continue that. Now, fragile markets are themselves very different. On the one hand, you have enormous economies in the African context like Nigeria, and of course then you have much smaller fragile countries. So we will have to have a different approach to those to reflect those differences. In places like Nigeria, we will have people on the ground. We will look to make potentially big investments in infrastructure or directly into companies in Nigeria. But we still want to reach the very small fragile markets too. And to do that, we'll have to be really creative with who we partner. So we can partner with sort of pan-continental companies with operations in fragile markets, like the clip you saw earlier from the CEO of Liquid Telecom, who's investing in the DRC. Or we can work with the financial services sector, and we can do innovative things with the way we share risk with the financial services sector to make sure that we incentivize on lending in really difficult places. Even in Sahelian markets, we've managed to do this year a deal with EcoBank that's allowing capital to flow into the Sahel. So it's about different approaches and different types of fragile markets, but our commitments remain strong to them.
Yeah, I think Matt made the point earlier on in his comments about route to market. You have to, it's not about any less commitment to smaller, more fragile markets. It's about being sensible and thoughtful about how you do it. And there is a different, the challenges are different with some of these very small, fragile markets than they are for some of the bigger, what we're calling the powerhouse markets.
So a slightly different topic. I'm going to move on. We've had a question from Nicholas Hetherington about agriculture investment. A pointed question, do we have the will or indeed the skills to enter into direct agricultural investment as opposed to lend to others to make that investment?
Yes, but I think we have to be quite selective and thoughtful about how we do it. I mean, agriculture is an absolutely critical part of many countries that we invest in economy, and obviously where the bulk of informal workers still are. At the same time, I think we need to find partners, operating partners who know how to make investments work on the ground and who can potentially do so at significant scale. So I think what you might see a little bit different in the future is trying to work, almost this more of a platform approach to agriculture, where we back an operating company that can make its own onwards investments in different places, perhaps several countries at once, not just in agriculture actually, but also forestry, to try to achieve impact at scale. But we will remain, we still have the appetite to put money into agriculture.
No, agriculture still, it has always been, actually, for the last 73 years. It's been a critical part of CDC. It forms a critical part of our history, and we know that it's among the most, from a sector perspective, among the most developmental sectors you can invest in. But as Matt said, I think, and hopefully in the very near future, we'll be talking in more detail about some partnerships with organizations that are on the ground, closer to agriculture in many of the markets that we invest in. So I think we need to balance a direct approach, which obviously we've done in the past and will continue to do, with a more nuanced partnership approach.
Yeah, agriculture really hits across the three strategy areas, doesn't it, really, in terms of employment, climate mitigation, and yeah, absolutely. Gender has come through. Has the decision to dedicate 25% in gender finance been one of the big lessons learned from the last 5 years? Is the sort of ambition based on success, or is it a stretch target?
Well, look, I think one of the things that I have to say I'm most proud of over the last 5 years has been the degree to which we have introduced gender as a key theme across our investments. And many people listening will know that CDC was one of the key drivers of of 2X, which is originally a collection of development finance institutions who had an ambition to invest $3 billion in gender finance over, I think, a 3-year period. Turned out we invested, I think, $7 billion. We've got a new target of 15 billion. That's as a group of DFIs. But CDC is very much has always been very much at the center, was a co-founder of that movement, very involved in the Gender Finance Alliance, and played a leadership role in that. And so, yes, we have learned a lot in the last 2 or 3 years. And I think we've learned particularly how valuable this can be. I think we've also learned that if you focus on it, investees, whether they're funds or whether they're larger companies, when you start talking about the opportunities to do more from a gender perspective, to be more inclusive from a gender perspective, I think things really happen. So, is 25%? I think 25%. And remember, the 25% doesn't just mean that we've got 25% of our investments where gender is sort of part of one of the things that we're looking at or concerned about. It means with 25% where that really is the focus. So in every investment, thinking about gender is a key part of what we do.
That question came from Elizabeth Villagomez, and one of the second part of her question was, are we seeing evidence yet from these investment decisions of the final impact coming through?
Yeah, I think you can get quite early. You can see that it's making a difference, and as I said, just even having 2X qualification and eligibility and qualification is a powerful driver to companies to do things, think differently. It's too early to say really whether or not, in terms of is there a relationship, for example, with the performance, the underlying financial performance of the company, or the impact of the company. But I think one of the exciting things over the next strategy period is that we will have a lot more data and a lot more information, and we can hopefully play an important leadership role in proselytizing gender finance going forward.
A whole pile of questions coming through, and perhaps unsurprisingly on climate, and particularly this tension between energy access and transition. One of the questions was, how can we be talking about transition when there are so many people who are living without energy access, and how do we then go about balancing those impact objectives? And obviously, this takes us back to an age-old question that comes up is, the need for a base load and focus on gas versus, what we've talked a lot about today is our focus on renewables.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, look, I mean, I think this is this sort of, it's not a conflict, but this sort of, on the one hand, you have 650 million people in Africa who don't have access to reliable power. If you don't have access to reliable power, you can't run hospitals, you can't run factories, you can't light your home. It's very difficult to have any form of real quality of life without access to power. And 650 million people in Africa don't have that opportunity. So for any development institution, that has to be front and center. On the other hand, we're in a climate emergency. It's key that organizations and institutions like CDC play an active role in helping transition the countries that we are investing in from fossil fuel power to renewable power. And I think it's possible to do both. That's actually at the heart also of the Global Energy Alliance, which was recently formed, led by the Rockefeller Foundation, which we were a founding and supporting partner of. And it's about how do you, on the one hand, try to address this energy access problem largely through renewables, and at the same time, make sure that you have a transition to a green economy. So I think it is possible to do both. I think you have to make some difficult decisions. I mean, you mentioned gas as being one of them. There are a very small number of countries where it may still make sense to develop gas power. I think they're a very small number. I think it has to be consistent with a clearly articulated transition to net zero. It has to be obviously the most efficient fuel available. I think it'll be a very small number of cases, but I think from just completely ruling out that in the short term as part of a transition, I think would be the wrong thing to do when you look at the magnitude of the access challenge.
Yeah, I mean, thank you to Paul Biggs and Eugenie Nizeamana, who have asked questions on that. And they've asked about one of the questions that very directly is, if you need to create reliable base load energy to work alongside renewable energy, just like happens in the West or otherwise, how can CDC support purely renewable energy without actually creating a reliable power system in those markets? Is that where you see that CDC would be focusing its efforts?
Yeah, look, I think that's a great question. And that's why we haven't absolutely ruled out any further investments in gas power, because there are situations, and I mean, and I think it's really important for development institutions to listen to the voice of the people in the countries that they're trying to provide capital to or provide help to. The voice of people in Africa is pretty clear on this issue. They do think there needs to be some ability to continue to develop, in particular gas-fired. But it has to be done very selectively, and it has to be done very consistent with some key standards which we've articulated through our gas filter.
Yeah, and I can see that there's a debate raging in the questions. We've also had one where the IDC in the UK has recently recommended that we end all of those exemptions, and a question as to whether we will do that. It sounds like not yet.
Not in the short term. And look, and I understand, or this is probably the most difficult issue that development finance faces today. This trying to balance this huge developmental need with the climate emergency. But I do think we have to keep in mind that Africa is a tiny part of emissions. We need to transition, definitely. But we need to do it in a way that's sensitive to the development needs in the country.
The other thing is to make sure that we have a multi-pronged approach to some of this. So, in the last few years, we've added a sort of ability to invest across the whole value chain of the power system. So it's not just generation, but it is transmission and distribution. And I think the other thing we can do through either our VC strategy and in future with access to more concessional finance resources is back sort of emerging climate technology, which can play its role, battery storage, etc., in contributing to this baseload issue. But I mean, of course, it's not going to provide answers overnight, but it's going to help in the medium term.
Right, I'll change topic there. I think that one's going to continue to rage for a while. I had a question about deploying technical assistance from an anonymous questioner. How's that going to work in the new strategy period? Will we continue to do that?
Yes, I mean, we're very proud in the last strategy period to have created our own technical assistance program. It was called CDC Plus. It's benefited many of our companies and beyond, and done some sort of market building work in places like Nepal, which is very recognized. Going forwards, we'll continue that. I mean, these types of programs do need sources of grant financing to back them. That's what almost all DFIs find to support their technical assistance programs. But we think it has a critical role to play to strengthen our portfolio and potentially beyond, to help in building the pipeline of green infrastructure investments or to help the broader investment ecosystem in specific countries. So that is something we're looking to continue.
I can see we're slightly over time, but I want to sneak in one last question if I can, which is about partnerships. Quite a few questions in here about partnerships with UK interests, but also with local partners on the ground, and how we look to make those work. Nick.
So I mean, and I mentioned in my remarks earlier, and we've had a successful series of partnerships in the last. During the last strategy period, and we don't set hard and fast rules about who we partner with, other than the one that Tenbite mentioned in his comments, which is they need to be aligned. We need to really believe that whoever we're partnering with cares as much as we do about the development impact that we're going to create. So that's the sort of key first step in any partnership. And then once you go past that, we are flexible. We think we have a significant advantage here in the UK in terms of partnering with UK companies with great British technology and great British innovation. But we've also demonstrated that in order to solve the development challenges in many of these countries, you have to be flexible in who you work with, but you have to start with a basic same value set.
Okay, thank you. I think that's all we've got time for. So I'll hand over to you, Nick.
Well, thank you, Lindsay. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Matt. And thanks, everybody, for listening. I just wanted to take 1 minute at the end just to, first of all, thank everybody who's been involved in this process. As I said, we only do this every 5 years, and a huge number of people have been involved, but particularly all the staff here who've worked so hard, all our partners at FCDO, all the many stakeholders, and there's obviously many of you who have dialed in today. But we, in all sorts of different ways, we reached out to a very broad range of stakeholders, and I think your input was extraordinarily valuable. And hopefully, as you read this document today, you'll recognize parts of it. I also want to particularly thank our board. We're very lucky at CDC to have such a strong and active board, and they've played a really critical part in the development of this strategy. And I also particularly want to thank our outgoing chairman, Sir Graham Wrigley, who opened this session today, who for what has been 8 years of really outstanding leadership of this organization, and for which we are all, everybody at CDC and everybody associated with CDC is very grateful. So we know that the hard work starts here. We know we'll only be successful if we work together with all of you, and if we collaborate across everything we do. Thanks for everything you've done with us in the past, and we hope that you'll stick with us in the future. And we look forward to hopefully a very successful and impactful next 5 years. So thank you all, and I wish you all a great festive season wherever you are. Thank you.